Hello and welcome to Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast, episode 17, where we're going to be talking about church safety and security teams and training. Today is Thursday, December the 29th, 2023. Today I'm joined by Anthony Wilson of South Plains Shooting Academy. Hey, Anthony, how are you?
Just fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Do you have a good Christmas?
Yes, sir. Lots of good food and some family time.
There you go. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure thing. So I am a certified firearms instructor, among other things. Have been since 2001. Own my own shooting academy where we do basic rifle, pistol, shotgun classes. We do the instructor classes, hold certifications through NRA, USCCA, Texas Parks and Wildlife, state of Mississippi, those kinds of things. I'm also a public school teacher full time. I'm a band director and have lots of experience with church and school safety teams and being on safety committees and those things. I've served on multiple church safety teams, currently the safety team leader and the Safe Sanctuary Committee chair of my church that we attend here in Clinton, Mississippi.
Gotcha. I'm trying to share your website.
Oh, bonus. Yeah, I see that.
Do you see it? Is it showing?
Yes, sir.
Cool. I wanted the audience to see it.
Awesome. I appreciate that.
Training products, contact us.
Right. Have lots of experience designing SOPs and emergency response guides and things like that as well for schools and churches and businesses, as well as within programs like Boy Scouts and Trail Life USA, those kinds of things.
Gotcha. Tell us about your experience in church safety.
Okay, I got on the church safety team at my home church back in Lubbock, Texas. Um, I don't remember what year that was even. It's going to be somewhere around 2013, I guess. And it was an interesting way of getting onto the safety team in the first place. I didn't even know that they had one. Um, but we were at Wednesday night supper in the main church dining room slash gym, and I was seated next to the executive pastor himself, the head pastor, and we were eating hamburgers, and all of a sudden I heard his breathing stop. And it turns out that he was choking on the heel of a tomato that was on his hamburger. But I didn't
Oh
know that
man.
at first. I saw the man start spitting out onions into his hand and just kind of freeze. And then I heard it seal in his throat where he couldn't breathe. And he just sat there. And I said, can you breathe? He said, shook his head, no. I said, well, can you stand? And he nodded yes. So he stood up and I got behind him and did the Heimlich. Not exactly like in the movies now. And nothing flew out. It turns out that he was at the bottom of a breath when the food particle got lodged. And then my little arms barely reached around him and his little belly. Um, and that proved somewhat challenging. But we did get it dislodged. And he was okay moments later and sat down and resumed dinner. And that's how I got invited to be on the safety team.
Well, and that is a scary event, and it's not scripted, and all of a sudden you're right in the middle of a choking person that you're trying to help, and like you said, it's not like it's in the movies. And unless you're a medical professional and you've performed that maneuver hundreds of times, you probably had to kind of figure it out, right? You had to figure out where your hands needed to be, and
Right.
but it's good that you figured it out, and he was able to breathe again, and I'm sure he was quite thankful to be able to breathe again. And that highlights the fact that part of the church safety and security team, we need to be as prepared as possible to deal with medical emergencies. And the chances of a medical emergency happening are probably a lot greater than having an active shooter in church.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
and that's why, like in our church congregation, we have like 30 volunteers. We have just a fabulous security and safety team. Most of them are Most of our volunteers are current or ex-police, military, and we have doctors and nurses, RNs that are members of the church that are typically in a service or two, and so we can depend on them for responding to medical emergencies. And so it's important that that part of our awareness and training includes medical emergencies.
Absolutely. In our church, and I'm now at a different church here in Mississippi, but we document all those encounters, and it's by far more medical encounters than it has been any kind of threat. We do have lots of transient traffic that comes through, foot traffic. So we're
Right.
dealing with visitors on campus, and we're dealing with flat tires and doors that were left unlocked or should be unlocked that aren't, those kinds of things. But I would say that as far as real incidents go, many more medical incidents than actual threats.
Right. We've I've been going to this non-denominational church here in Charleston, Coastal Community Church. My wife and I have been going there for, I don't know, 15 plus years. And we've seen the church grow by leaps and bounds. And I think really the only thing that we've really ever had happen would be we had a couple of domestic disturbances happen in the fellowship hall that we've had to mitigate or remediate, whatever you want to say, calm the situation down and de-escalate the situation and get the parties separated and all that. And then we had a non-custodial father who attempted to pick up his children out of children's church or children's ministry and take them when he was not the one that registered them, and they were in the middle of a divorce or had just gotten divorced or something. Anyway, he was a non-custodial parent and he did not have authority to take the child or children out of our children's ministry area. And we have a very secure children's ministry area. There's locked doors that the volunteers that are working that service, they unlock the door with a remote. And we have a security person on the inside of the children's area that is also able to get up and push a button to open the door. And the parent has to have a badge or a name tag with numbers on it, and the child has corresponding badge with name tags on it. So there's a defined process in order to ingress and egress with your children. And we look at our children's ministry as our most precious resource, right? We want the kids to be safe. We want the parents to be in the sanctuary during praise and worship time. We don't want them worrying about their kids, the safety of their
Right.
children, right? And
Yes,
so it's
sir.
very important that you have established processes and procedures to keep them safe.
I like that your facility has the architectural support for that kind of system. A lot of the churches, as they've been built up over the years and added on to, they don't meet what we would call safety standards or security standards at all. And so we're trying to piece together a process and having to move people to different classrooms and sometimes fight resistance within our own church to provide that safe environment.
Well, we've been very fortunate that we were able to build a brand new building that is a dual purpose building. It's actually a athletic auditorium with a built-on fellowship hall with a snack bar area and the entrance into the children's ministry area. And so during the week, all the chairs in the auditorium are picked up, and the school across the street they can come over and have athletic events, and other schools or churches can rent out our space. And then on Saturday morning, we have a bunch of volunteers that go in and drag all the chairs out of the storage areas in the back and set them all up, and off to the races we go. And so they were able to build in all of the cameras and the uh, locking doors and et cetera, et cetera. So we're very, very fortunate that we have that.
Good deal.
So so I guess you're the one of the leaders of your security safety team.
Yes, sir. I have two titles up there. I am the safety team leader, and we do call that a safety team. And then I'm also the Safe Sanctuary Committee chair, which inside the United Methodist Church, that is an official committee position that gets to handle all the recommendations that come down from the United Methodist Church governing body and come down to the churches, and then put all the policies in place as far as childcare policies and background checks for volunteer leaders dealing with the youth programs and the children's programs and all those kinds of things.
Right. So, topic one that you suggested we could talk about says, can of worms. Should the church allow licensed concealed carriers in the congregation to be armed at church or restrict it to just the safety security team? And that certainly is a huge can of worms. In
Yes, sir.
South Carolina, you have to have a concealed carry permit, concealed weapon permit, CWP. But the pastor or the head administrator of the church actually has to give you permission to carry in the church. And we have like, I don't know, 500, probably about 500 attendees during the three different services that we have. We have a lot of people, and the pastor has given church members with CWPs permission to carry in the church. And well, I think that's great. It does prove to be a tactical issue in that we have a person that's uh, assigned to shadowing the pastor, dignitary protection sort of thing, except for we're not allowed to shadow him. We're supposed to be kind of melt into the background and be close enough to, if something were to happen, we could get to him pretty quickly. He doesn't want us on his shoulder or on his elbow, right?
Right.
So and we also have somebody that's in the auditorium that sits in the back and keeps an eye on the doors and watches what's going on and is there to respond to any issues that occur. And we have radios, and so everybody's wearing an earpiece. We have like 8 volunteers and 2 off-duty police officers in our fellowship hall. So, but still, I don't volunteer in the auditorium because I'm just afraid if poop were to hit the fan, you'd have people in the congregation waving guns around, and God forbid, start firing or meaning well, and holy cow. So I volunteer as Rover 2 in the fellowship hall, or I'm Rover 1 out in the parking lot.
Mhm.
So I don't have to worry about that. I'll let somebody else worry about that, and hopefully it'll never occur.
Well, there you go. That's the hope. And it is a sensitive topic, and people swing all the way across that pendulum. Sometimes people think that only law enforcement should be able to carry, to all the way to constitutional carry in there. And I just kind of wanted to poke the bear a little bit and have a dialogue about it and throw some ideas out. I am extremely constitutionally minded and personally feel that anybody with a permit should be able to carry. And I would, if the permit weren't in the mix, I could eventually get to any law-abiding citizen being able to carry. But let's stick with the permitted carriers. Here in Mississippi, it's the same way, except we don't have to ask the pastor's permission. You have to have an enhanced carry permit to be able to carry in a church in Mississippi. We do have 2 levels of permit, the standard permit and then that enhanced permit. And the standard permit doesn't require a class. It's basically just a background check. But then the enhanced permit requires the class from your local instructor to get state certified as having the enhanced carry permit. And then you can carry almost any place, just not courtrooms that are in session and police stations. So you can carry in a church. Our safety team gets civil immunity if they have that enhanced carry permit and are named in the minutes of the church meeting as being members of the safety team. And we're able to name them not out loud by name in the minutes that are published to the whole church, but we're able to name them to uh, our council, our administrative council, and then basically mark those names out before those minutes go completely public, so that we named them and they're on record in the church office as those minutes, but they're not published for anonymity's sake.
Good. That's very good.
But one of my thoughts on this matter is that, we would have very different standards regarding the qualifications or experience or competency of these licensed carriers during let's say, a hypothetical discussion during a board meeting, a trustee meeting, a committee meeting, trying to talk about church policy, than we would during an actual shooting event where people are being shot in a mass shooting. I think our standard changes that moment. And then in the aftermath of a shooting, looking back at the situation that occurred when some threat came in and started massacring people in our congregation, I think after the fact, we all wish that the proverbial good guy with a gun could have gotten there sooner. And so I'm just after, can we have that resolute good guy that's armed and ready to take out a threat? Can we have that person closer and with a quicker arrival time than what we see in most of these situations?
Right.
I also think that that policy of you are not qualified enough or experienced enough or trained enough to carry a church tried to disallow young David from fighting Goliath. None of the people actually charged with protecting the flock would step up and fight Goliath. And this boy said, "Well, I'll do it." And then the people around him said, "No, you're too young, you're too small, you're too weak, you're too this, you're too that." But you know what? God was with him, and he went and picked his 5 stones, and he got that done. And thank goodness that the committee of his little church group did not actually prevent him from fighting the good fight there.
Right. Well, and he was a shepherd too. And so he was using the weapon of his day, which was a slingshot, right? Stones
Right?
and a slingshot. And that's what he used to keep the wolves at bay. That's how he protected the sheep. And so Goliath was, in his mind, no different than the wolves that he was charged with protecting. And it also comes to a matter of faith in that story, and that he had the faith, that God was with him, and that this Philistine giant was not going to, you know, use God's name in vain, and bully, the Israelites and all of that. And so he had enough faith to step up and take care of business. And
Right.
I don't know if all of that relates directly back to what we're talking about, but I'm sure some of it applies.
I
And
think when evil raises its head, and then through our faith, we do have to stand up resolute against that evil, and that comes in many forms. But I think that is a moral of that story.
sure. Um, so I think that, like in our situation in South Carolina, our I guess the sticking point when it comes to um our volunteers on our safety team, um, there are positions, the different rover positions is you're asked or required to have a CWP and carry a weapon concealed. Uh, we have, we just recently had a law passed 2 years ago that says, if you have a CWP, you can choose to either open carry or conceal carry.
Right.
And our pastor, he doesn't want people focusing on the sight of weapons, except for, the police officers. He doesn't want, he wants the weapons concealed so that church members that are going there to do praise and worship, they're not going to be disturbed or distracted or what have you, right? And I agree with that.
Me
Um,
too. It's very
however,
common.
um, from a security team leader's point of view, our concealed weapon permit test is better than nothing, but I mean they put a torso sized target at 50 feet and give you 50 rounds, and you have to hit the inner, the 9 ring and the center ring enough times to qualify, right?
Right. Ours
And
too.
you're in daylight, it's a very relaxed session, and you're not under duress, your heart's not pounding, adrenaline's not pumping,
Static
and
target.
at a static target, right? And you and I know very well that if an active shooter event happens, or let's say somebody charges the pastor from 2 rows back, because they're angry about God knows what, and they pull out a weapon, all of a sudden your adrenaline's going to be pumping, and you're going to have tunnel vision. You're not going to hear what's going on around you, and it's a very, very different scenario. And they say that when it comes to weapons training like that, that you respond to your lowest level of training,
Hmm.
right? So if the only level of training you have is shooting at a static target that's in broad daylight, that's not shooting back at you, um, are you going to stand? Are you going to freeze? Are you going to stay stationary and pretend that that moving target is stationary when it's not? You know, I was never in the military, but I know that they train, uh, like people in the army or whatever, Marines. They spend a lot of time teaching people how to kill,
Right.
and hand to hand combat using weapons, blah blah blah. And there's been many documented cases where when poop hits the fan on the battlefield, some people just freeze up or they
Right.
run, you know,
That's what
and
we do know is that you don't actually know how you would respond in that real event until it happens.
exactly. And I'm very fortunate that I've never been in a live fire uh situation like that. And I can only hope that in my mind that I've already determined that I'm going to act, right?
Right.
But like you said, you don't know how you're going to react until the poop hits the fan and all of a sudden you're in the middle of it.
Right. I agree. But when you look at the figures of defensive gun uses, whether you go with the Gary Kleck's numbers of 2.5 million times a year, or the recent CDC study that shows somewhere between 600,000 and 3 million times a year, an armed law-abiding citizen stops a crime with the mere presence of the gun. Usually doesn't even require the firing of the gun. But when you look at those numbers, you can't convince me that all of those 600,000 to 3 million people were highly trained experts, right? I
Oh, of
know
course
that
not.
most of those were normal Joes with no background in training who just bought the gun at the gun shop, maybe fired it once or twice, but then successfully did stop a crime later. And I'm not calling for that or advocating that. I, of course, in an ideal world, would love to see every gun owner go through class after class after class, like I've done and like I try to get people to do. But they just don't typically do that much. But I think that we have to recognize that most of those defensive gun uses are by untrained people. And then we had the noteworthy one recently in the Indiana Mall. Eli, uh, is it Dixon? No, I had his name somewhere right here. Eli Dickin. No formal training at all. Placed 8 out of 10 shots on target in less than 15 seconds from when the bad guy started shooting
Was
in
that
that
the
mall
the
shooting.
incident in the mall?
Right at 40 yards.
Yeah.
Quite impressive for anybody to do. And you would think he's a Navy SEAL or something, but he's not. He had no formal training. So we
No,
have to
but
keep in mind that it
I'll
can be done.
I'll guarantee you he's had some firearms training. He didn't just luckily hit that guy. That tells me that he's been to the range multiple times and he's
Right,
lots of rounds downrange, right?
right.
And it's like that guy was it Texas where the guy shot that guy and the guy was shooting people, going after the pastor or something, and
Yeah, so that
he
was
was
in
like
Fort Worth. Jack Wilson was the hero on that one.
yeah, he was like 50 or 60 feet away from him when he shot him in the head. One
Right, one
round.
shot. Yeah.
And
But in that situation, you saw the trained safety team members get killed,
yeah,
two of them,
yeah.
before the saving grace. And then, by the way, if you go back and watch the extended video of that to see after the takedown shot, you see all kinds of people in that congregation pull out guns and start moving around. You see the rest of
Yeah.
the safety team moving, you see other individuals moving. there was not one error. While there were muzzle violations, there was nobody else shot in that incident mistakenly or any of that stuff that people like to think about hypothetically. It
Yeah,
just
that's
didn't happen,
crazy.
thankfully.
Yeah, I would like to think that, especially people that are on the safety team that are carrying weapons, I would like to think that they take the responsibility upon themselves to get familiar with their weapon of choice and do some training. I'm not advocating they need to go to the range every day or every week or necessarily every month, but I think every quarter, I think we should encourage our safety team members to, and I'm doing that at our church. I'm like, hey, can we talk to the pastor and see if he will help with offsetting some of the expense of buying the ammo and the targets or whatever, and I'm not saying that the church needs to pay for the whole thing, but if they could, they're using funds for other programs in the church. I think this is just as an important program as any,
Right,
and it's just like we get our driver's license. We don't know how to drive. We go take our driving test. By the grace of God, we pass it, and then all of a sudden you got a, 15, 16, 17-year-old kid with a learner's permit driving on the streets, and we're like, oh, lock
right.
up children, and we
I,
learn how to drive through what? Through practice. That's how we learn how to drive. And it's the same thing with shooting. It's a perishable skill, and I honestly probably should go more often than I do, but I've been shooting for years, and I don't really think it's muscle memory, and I feel very confident if I were to have to use deadly force, I could do it very judiciously if I needed
right.
to. And
It
I
is
again,
important to keep up a training regimen personally
yeah,
if you're a gunman or a shooter.
absolutely.
And then there are classes out there now for church safety teams and such. And just check your local range and look around a little bit. We've got some great ones down here in my area. There's a really nice range that does church specific stuff, and they host
Yeah,
everything from monthly church qualifications. A few of the safety teams actually offer a shooting qualification monthly, and I don't know if they mandate that or if they mandate. I don't know if they mandate once a quarter or what, but they offer it monthly. And then we have dedicated church safety classes, and you can come out and bring your safety team for the whole day. Uh, and those are great opportunities and time to try your holster and your firearm and your manipulation skills and your thought process skills and all that things that you can do in those classes. You can't just do on a static square range yourself.
right. I think one of the things that's available to everybody that wants to do it is IDPA.
Yes.
IDPA is a great thing to do. I've had friends of mine that have been trying to get me into it for years, and maybe one day I'll just give up and go, okay, fine, I'll do it. But I've heard that it's a real good um, activity to learn how to move and to pull your weapon from concealment, not flash somebody, not muzzle somebody, not, get yourself disqualified. There are very strict gun safety rules in IDPA. And so you have to be
Yes.
very careful and very intentional with how you handle your firearm. And learn how to shoot behind barricades and shoot, don't shoot, you have to make those decisions. So that's certainly the problem with our gun ranges down here in South Carolina is none of them will allow you to pull your weapon from concealment. The
Okay.
only way that you can shoot is for the weapon to be on the bench, and then you pick it up and point it down range and shoot it. You're not allowed to practice drawing your weapon or anything like that and it's a liability issue with their insurance company, I'm sure. Uh, but I don't really know of a program down here that is geared towards, unless it's a company like yours that puts on those sort of trainings for church safety members to do that sort of thing.
Right. I'm in addition to having my own shooting academy, I'm on a shooting instructor staff at a different range. And they really are the ones I'm talking about there that do all that. They do USCCA's classes, and then they do a
Right.
defensive pistol one, defensive pistol two. They bring in big name instructors like Tom Gibbons and Brian Hill, and Masad Ayub has been coming
Oh,
in every
yeah.
year for the last 4 years. I took his Mag 40 class 2 years ago, and holy smokes, I've been following that man for over 20 years, right?
Right.
Reading all his stuff, watching his videos, all that. But I took 23 pages of notes on the first day, and it's a
Wow.
4 day class. Um, so that was an amazing experience. But trying to find something like that as close as you can, or bring in an instructor. You may be able to, if your range isn't offering that stuff, you may be able to contact an instructor like that and get them to come in and do a special event. And that's where we can draw from the holster and such, is if we're having a special class on a special day.
Good stuff. So let's move on to number two. It says often overlooked aspects, facets of safety team training, congregation management during an incident, awareness, conflict, de-escalation, medical training and equipment, reporting, reunification procedures. We kind of touched on some of those things already.
Right. I think when we talk church safety team or security team, everybody goes to that active shooter event first in their head. But the truth is that is the smallest percentile of threat that we might face, or incident that we would face on any given Sunday or whatever. And thank
Right,
goodness. Um, but my question's here, your safety team is trained to handle the bad guy or the problem. Is somebody trained to direct the rest of the congregation with instructions or movement? And the onlookers or the parents who are trying to get to their kids, you can tell them, hey, we need y'all to evacuate out this door. Those parents are going to go for their kids.
right,
Um, and so, do you have somebody trained on how to deal with that and to handle that while your main safety team element is handling the actual problem?
right. Yeah, we do actually have a process and a procedure in place to like in our children's ministry, our Rover 3 person, if that were to go down, then they're instructed to, and all the teachers in each individual classroom have an emergency exit procedure that they go out the
Right,
back of the church and they meet in a specific area, and the security person stays with them and make sure that any parents and the parents are actually going to be told not to do that, to not go rushing
right,
to the children, because it just creates confusion and pandemonium. And again, proof's in the pudding, and if the poop ever hits the fan, then I guess we're going to see how it works, right?
right.
The only way you get really good at it is to have, drills, which
Hmm.
we probably ought to have, and we haven't had any drills like that, which we really probably should. Again, it goes back to the lowest level of training, if y'all have never had to evacuate the building under duress or have a timed evacuation, it says, okay, let's see how fast we can get the kids and teachers safely to the evacuation point, you
Right,
know, it all boils down to training. And if you don't train that way, if you don't have a live training at least once a year with your congregation and or with your teacher, your classroom teachers and children's ministry, even if it's only two or three children, you know, or people standing in as children to go, okay, kids, here we go. We're going out this door, just do it in an orderly, non-panicked fashion, blah, 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 you know.
right,
Um, it's scary that if you don't have that kind of structured training during, you know, non-emergency incidents, um, then you're who knows?
What's it going to be like during the real thing? Yeah.
Yeah, because you're only like, oh shit, like,
We've seen that at schools when we've had bomb threats called into the school. We have to
like,
evacuate and even bust the kids up and go to a secondary location or something. Then we discovered that we needed to make sure we had actual roll sheets and that we had the parents who were coming to claim the kids sign them out. We may need to take pictures of their driver's license or whatever to know who took which kid,
right,
because that's mass chaos twice in that event.
sure.
Also, do you have somebody still monitoring for additional assailants or developments? Do you have safety team's focused on the problem at the moment, do you have somebody who is hanging back intentionally to scan for additional threats or secondary threats?
Good point.
And
Uh,
then, like you were saying, do you train awareness and conflict avoidance, de-escalation, resolution skills? I think a lot of safety teams just focus on the handgun part and those shooting qualifications or whatever they're doing, and they need to be focused on de-escalation tactics so that we don't get to the shooting portion. You know,
right.
um, interview techniques, those reporting skills and processes, all of that stuff's important.
Verbal judo,
Right,
being able to talk somebody down off a ledge. And,
right,
you know, sometimes when you have people that are upset, they're looking for somebody to talk to. Sometimes the best thing you can do after you get them to like we have associate pastors that are not preaching during the service, and we can get a hold of them via radio or hand signal or whatever, and say, hey, you got somebody here that needs to talk to somebody, and we can stand by and shadow the situation. Like we can stand 10 feet away or 6 feet away or whatever and be present, but let the pastor, associate pastor, handle the situation. And a lot of times you can just let people talk and let
right,
them, they just want to be heard, right? They're upset
right,
about something. You have no clue what they're upset about. They just want somebody to listen to them. And typically, if you let them vent for a few minutes and let them tell you what the problem is, then at some point you can say, okay, I hear what you're saying. How can we help you? You know, and the associate pastor can step in with their pastoral skills and minister to the person in need in a way that is going to help them, hopefully.
right,
Uh, but yeah, it's very, um, it's like you said, it's not, you know, yes, we need to be prepared and trained for worst case scenarios, but we also need to be trained and prepared for day to day dealing with human beings, other human beings. You know, we open our churches, we provide a open, welcoming environment for anybody to walk in off the street and come hear the gospel, right?
right,
And we want our pastor and our first impressions team want people to feel welcome. They want to see a smiling face. You can say, welcome to Coastal Community Church. Come on in. Um, and with that welcoming environment, um, you're kind of opening yourself up to whatever comes in the door, right? And you have to
hmm
be prepared to de-escalate. You need to be prepared to identify possible problems, whether it be street people walking in, but from behind the church, looking like street people, a person, and homeless person that smells, you know the deal, we don't ever turn anybody away, but
right,
it's always good to identify uh, possible threats, possible danger, or just just need to keep, we have people walk in and they'll sit in the back of the congregation and they don't fit the mold, we have people walk in with dogs on leashes, and as long as they're not causing problems and they're not yelling and screaming or drinking MD 2020 or whatever, out of a flask, we welcome them and we let them come in, and as long as they behave themselves, we leave them alone. We keep an
absolutely,
eye on them, but we leave them alone. We don't bother them,
right.
And that's what the church is for, right? I
Yes,
mean,
sir.
we're to some extent we're all sick and need Jesus. We're
hmm
all sinners, saved by grace. And why do we go to church? Because we're broken and we need to be fixed. And we need to hear the gospel. We need to sing. We need to have fellowship. All that stuff.
Right,
And so church security or church safety teams, it's a ministry just like the rest of the ministries in the church. And sadly enough, since 1980, there's been an uptick in church violence. Right here in Charleston, we have the Emmanuel 9, where
all right,
this young man went in and sat in a Bible study for an hour. And before he pulled his gun and started killing people.
Right.
And one of the associate pastors in that group of 9 people had a CWP, but because of the rules of that congregation, nobody was allowed to carry a weapon into the church other than a police officer.
Right.
Had he been able to carry his concealed weapon into that Bible study, yeah, a couple of people might have gotten killed, but he wouldn't have killed 9 people. You know, he could have
Right.
remediated that situation pretty quickly.
Well, and if 3 or 4 of them had been
Yeah,
armed and resolute, then I mean, it could have turned the tide.
yeah, and so unfortunately, there are pastors that have the mindset of, well, I've been the pastor of this church for 30 years and we've never had a single problem. Why am I gonna start feeling like I need to let armed people, our congregation, carry weapons into our church? This is not the
Right.
wild, wild west, for God's sake. You
I
know,
wonder
and
if King Solomon had guards at the temple.
it's like, I'm like, do you not watch the news? Have you not seen,
Mhm.
like the synagogues now? Synagogues are under attack.
Right.
Crazy gunmen are going in and shooting up the synagogues. And I don't care what denomination or what church association or affiliation you have. I mean, everybody deserves, to be able to go to your church of choice and feel safe, right?
Yes.
And I think church leadership, our pastor, for instance, I think once a month he goes to Florida and he's part of this bigger gathering of ministers and pastors from the southeast or whatever, I guess. And they talk about that stuff. And 15 or 16 years ago, I remember when we only had 3 people doing church security. It was me,
Right.
a friend of mine by the name of Bruce. He was a Charleston County Sheriff's deputy, jailer, level 2 jailer, and our director was at the time, I think he had just retired from the highway patrol. So we had 2 law enforcement. I'm ex-law enforcement, and we only had 3 of us. And so our pastor was educated by being exposed to other pastors and preachers that were very keen on the need for church security, right?
Hmm.
And it took us a little while to get him on board with it, but he's fully on board with it, and he's helping to fund. We got 48 cameras, we got 30 people on volunteers, we got police officers with their patrol vehicles on property during all 3 services.
Right.
So I'm very thankful that our safety and security team is ministry is in full bloom. It's in full swing.
Yeah, I think we've seen movement that way, just because of the volume of other incidents, and um, I think sometimes the knee-jerk reaction goes the wrong way, but then as the pendulum swings back, they start moving the right direction on church safety. But I think that after, sufficient amount of time has passed after whatever last event hit the media, I think that the momentum starts to fall back off. And I think
Right,
sometimes we have to make sure that we keep pushing that momentum forward.
right. We need to maintain a certain level of alertness.
Right.
You know, Code yellow all the time. You
Right.
know, always be head on a swivel, always be paying attention, and that's one of the you know when I was in law enforcement, went through the academy and all that. This is back in '82. We had to, as part of the curriculum, I had to read this thing called Street Survival. And back then, um, the number one killer of peace officers was domestic disturbances.
Right.
The number 2 killer of peace officers was routine traffic stops. And there's no such thing as a routine traffic stop, because I don't care what the computer tells you where that license plate's from or what kind of vehicle it's on. You don't know who's behind that wheel or who's in that car, right? Or who's
Right.
hiding in the trunk or in the back of a pickup truck. And when you fall into the mindset of it's routine, like at church, there's no, when nothing ever happens, it's very easy to think, ah, well, I'm here, I'm carrying a weapon, I'm greeting people, nothing's going to happen, nothing's happened ever, so why should I worry about it? I'm like, you can't have that mindset either. You've always got to keep your head on a swivel and paying attention to people and look for people that are paying attention to you, because
Right.
90% of the time people are walking into church looking at their smartphones, right? Or talking to other people. They're not looking for the security people. They're not looking for the police officers. They don't care about any of that. So you're looking for predators that are looking for those types of things, right? You
Right.
got to pay attention to them.
And there's another part to that mindset that's addressed in, I think it's Gavin de Becker's book, The Gift of Fear, where he talks about human psychology tends to dismiss that information. We receive information that there may be something weird or different, and then we start trying to justify it until we can dismiss it. So we maybe heard gunshots, but we say, oh, it's probably just a car backfiring, and no, we should have paid attention to the gift of fear that was given to us, to that sixth sense.
Right.
Um, and if you see something that might be suspicious, like a package or a box or a person or a car that doesn't belong or whatever, it is worth reporting and reporting right now. Hopefully, it turns out to be nothing, but it could be
Sure.
something. So we
Sure.
have to train our safety team for sure, if not the whole congregation, on go ahead and make that report. See something, say something.
Exactly. And I think that this is outside of the scope of this podcast episode. That goes back to that OODA loop, right?
Right.
That Mossad talks about.
Well, I
And
almost brought that up earlier. You're talking about verbal judo, um, and I have read the verbal judo books by the original author there, and I don't find his presentation of the concept of verbal judo useful for self-defense because that's not really what he's talking about. But Chris Bird in the Concealed Handgun Manual takes those concepts and directly applies them to defensive use, and shows you a defensive mindset use of those verbal judo tactics. And so I do recommend that people read that. And I think that would be a good read for the safety team. It goes beyond just carrying a firearm, but that mental part
sure.
of verbal judo. And the OODA loop is an important part of that. But you don't get out of reading about it, you don't get a good understanding and usage of it. So that's where you need to find a class that actually gets up and role plays those scenarios and lets you
Right.
practice the leaps and the pace model and the OODA loop and jump in that reactionary gap in the OODA loop. Those are advanced concepts, but we need more of our safety teams knowing those.
Sure. Yeah, I think people that are ex-law enforcement or current law enforcement are probably a little more in tune with that.
Right,
Uh, People that are firearms instructors, people that have combat experience, depending on what role you had when you were in law enforcement, uh, you might be more aware of the importance of that,
right.
right?
More
Uh,
skilled in the usage of it.
yes, you know, I don't I don't want to get that good in it.
Well, as a public school teacher, I may use it every day.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
But also, that kind of segues into medical training, talking about other things that the safety team, at least, and maybe church staff and some others should be trained in. Um, and I think we've seen a move from basic first aid kit and just knowing first aid CPR to knowing bleeding control and being able to use tourniquets and chest seals and combat dressings and all that stuff. And so I
Right,
encourage churches that if they don't have that equipment, encourage them to make those purchases and then get the training behind that to use that equipment.
right. You can never have enough training. I don't care what area it is.
Right.
And I'm hoping in 2024 that our safety team can embrace some of this stuff a little more seriously.
Do you have bleeding control kits on your campus?
I don't think we do.
We've recently added those, and by recently I mean, I guess 2.5 years ago, we added a bleeding control kit in each building of the campus. And then this
Yeah.
past year, we added a double dose of Narcan in each building on campus.
Right.
So each building's got its own AED, its own first aid kit, multiple first aid kits, bleeding control kit, and double dose of Narcan for fentanyl OD or whatever. Not as concerned about the person who might be doing the drugs as we are for our safety team who might be interacting with them. Um, just based
Yeah,
on what we've read.
we have AEDs, we have medical personnel that are certified in the use of them. And we do have first aid kits. They're not necessarily bleeding control kits, but they are first aid kits, and some of that stuff can probably be used in that fashion. Um, but I will certainly bring those things up
Right.
to our leadership. And we're getting down to 4 minutes. Got 4 minutes left.
Okay.
So, any other thoughts?
Well, let's go to training versus drills, um, and just think about that for a minute. That there's a difference between a training class or curriculum and then the drill. And I think training is where we learn new stuff. We need to look at what types of training we need and the frequency of those. And then drills are where we take that information and we practice it. And so we're testing our ability to respond to that situation, as well as our equipment that's in place and all of those different things. And we're making notes after the drill, coming back together to discuss, okay, did things go right or did things go differently than expected? Do we need to change our policies and procedures? Do we need to change our equipment, location, or what we have on hand? Do we need to change our people and their location and who we have on hand? And those things are all terribly important. And then I think record of those drills and exercises could also go to help lower liability insurance or to at least keep records for that purpose to be able to show the insurance company that, hey, we do have our policies and procedures, our emergency response guide, and we are testing it periodically, maybe quarterly or semi-annually, and we're making revisions as needed.
There you go. Well, Anthony, I appreciate you coming on to our Liberty and Gun Rights podcast and doing this episode with me. And I appreciate your service to your church and your experience and your training. And I'm gonna go ahead and do the conclusion. We got 3 minutes left. So to my audience, I would say thank you for the privilege of your time. Our podcast is hosted on Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Be sure to share our podcast with your Second Amendment friends, family, co-workers, and church members. You can contact us at Liberty Gun Rights Podcast at proton.me. That's Liberty Gun Rights Podcast at proton.me. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Happy New Year. Please have a